So if we go back to 2015, over half the country trusted higher education. But today, that number has just plummeted to 36%.
Yeah, 36% is, I mean, it's a staggering drop for less than a decade.
It really is. We are basically looking at an institutional collapse in real time.
Yeah.
And the level of, partisan animosity that's driving this fracture is so severe that statisticians are saying we literally have to look back to the American Civil War to find a comparable public divide.
Right. The metrics on this are honestly pretty sobering. When you dig into the Gallup data and just the broader historical context, partisan animosity is, well, it's actually now a stronger predictor of discrimination in the U.S. than racial prejudice.
Wow.
Yeah. We're dealing with an environment where institutional trust is just evaporating because our fundamental ability to, share space with people who hold different worldviews, it's totally broken down.
And that breakdown is exactly the focus of our deep dive today. We are exploring this really fascinating research paper by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover, and he's analyzing the Constructive Dialogue Institute's 2025 report.
Which is a massive, incredibly detailed report.
It is. The mission for us today is to uncover how these massive, highly complex institutions, specifically universities in this case, are actively trying to rewire their cultures. They are trying to teach people how to constructively disagree.
I guess, yeah.
And we really want to uncover the actual mechanics of those systems and how you, listening to this right now, can apply these exact communication strategies to your own life, your workplace, your family.
But before we go any further, I think we really should establish some boundaries for this analysis.
Oh, absolutely.
The source material naturally examines some highly polarized, politically charged environments, especially looking at all those cascading protests and the ideological tensions we saw back in the autumn of 2024.
Right, which were everywhere in the news.
Exactly. But our focus today is strictly on the infrastructure of dialogue. We are analyzing the data on how human beings communicate under pressure and the organizational systems required to support that. We are absolutely not evaluating or taking sides on the actual political or social issues being debated.
Yeah, that is so important to state. We are entirely focused on the how, not the what. And, to understand the how, we have to look at what this breakdown actually costs an organization day to day.
The operational toll is it's staggering.
Because the headline-grabbing protests, they're loud, but they are really just the visible symptom of what is honestly a massive operational nightmare behind the scenes.
Yeah, according to the research, 68% of chief student affairs officers dealt with significant free speech controversies in just the prior year.
68%.
And here is the metric that should make any organizational leader, stop and pause. Each of those incidents consumed an average of 47 hours of senior leadership time.
Wait, 47 hours? That's over a full work week per incident.
Per incident, yes. Just completely diverted away from the university's core educational mission, just to manage the fallout of poor communication.
That's insane. But, as loud as those protests are, the research hints at this much quieter and maybe more insidious problem happening in the dorms and the seminars.
Right, the silent majority. It's essentially an epidemic of self-censorship. The Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression FIRE, they conducted these surveys revealing that 45% of students self-censor in informal peer interactions.
Almost half.
Almost half the student body is literally afraid to articulate their thoughts to their own classmates. And faculty are reporting that it's not that students are empty of opinions, it's that they simply lack the cognitive tools to engage across a divide.
They can't separate the idea from the person, right?
Exactly. They struggle to distinguish a substantive argument about an abstract idea from a personal attack on their character.
And when you can't separate an idea from an identity, any ideological difference just feels like a literal physical threat. It makes me think of muscle atrophy.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right, like if you spent 2 years in physical isolation, avoiding the gym entirely, your muscles would just waste away.
Yeah.
And we saw the communicative equivalent of this during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yes, the timing was a perfect storm.
Students were isolated during their most formative developmental years. They were avoiding the gym of casual hallway debates and, dining hall arguments. So their disagreement muscles literally atrophied right when political polarization in the broader society was just accelerating.
And then they came back to campus.
Right. They returned. The world demanded they lift incredibly heavy ideological weights, and their muscles simply gave out.
The developmental psychology underlying that analogy is really critical here. Late adolescence and early adulthood, Those are the most vital periods for identity formation and moral reasoning.
It's when you figure out who you are.
Exactly. So when young adults in that specific developmental window are put into an environment that demands ideological conformity, and you couple that with the ever-present threat of, like, public shaming on social media, they experience what psychologists call epistemic closure.
Epistemic closure, so they just shut down.
Right. Instead of exploring ideas with curiosity, they retreat into cognitive rigidity. They just lock down their worldviews entirely to protect themselves from social exile.
Well, if the collective disagreement muscle has atrophied to the point of epistemic closure, then we obviously need a specific physical therapy regimen to rehabilitate it.
Which brings us to the playbook.
Yes, the source material outlines this really comprehensive playbook developed by the Constructive Dialogue Institute, and they appropriately named it Constructive Dialogue. But the text is very, very careful to distinguish this from simply being polite.
Yeah, because politeness is often just a mask for avoidance.
Right, it feels like a mechanism to avoid conflict entirely. Just smile and nod.
Exactly. But constructive dialogue, as the report defines it, it actually demands genuine curiosity about an opposing perspective. It requires intellectual humility regarding your own limitations and a real willingness to engage with complexity.
So it's active, not passive.
Highly active. And it serves a dual purpose. First, you have the epistemic function, which is advancing our collective understanding of a complex issue. But second, there's the social function, which is building relational trust across deep differences. You really can't have the first without the second.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Because the mechanics of this playbook basically boil down to 3 core practices, right?
Right, 3 main pillars of action.
First, listening for values rather than just surface-level positions. Second, asking genuine questions instead of laying rhetorical traps designed to, score debate points. And third, inviting personal narratives to humanize highly abstract debates.
And the data on this specific intervention is incredibly strong. When they ran the faculty and staff certification program, it yielded a 99% satisfaction rate.
Which is unheard of for any corporate or institutional training.
Truly. But what stands out to me even more is the long-term retention. 10 months after the training, 92% of participants were still actively applying the listening for values technique in their daily work.
Okay, that retention rate tells us we're moving past abstract theory into durable habit formation. I mean, they found the tools practically useful enough to just integrate them into their daily professional lives.
Exactly.
But I have to challenge the practicality of this in high-stress scenarios.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's say you're in the middle of a deeply contentious argument, right? The other person is clearly operating in bad faith. They're just trying to dunk on you for an audience. In that volatile moment, asking a genuine question or patiently listening for values, it feels completely disconnected from reality.
It feels impossible.
It feels like asking someone to stop and do yoga in the middle of a boxing match.
That is a very fair critique. And it requires immense discipline, which is exactly why it have to be trained. But to understand why it is functionally necessary to stop boxing and start asking those questions, we have to look at the science of deep canvassing that's highlighted in the research.
Deep canvassing, right.
Yeah. When you are in a polarized debate and the other person feels their core identity is under threat, presenting them with objective facts actually backfires.
Because the facts are perceived as weapons.
Exactly the opposite of what we logically expect. When a person experiences an amygdala hijack, that fight or flight response, their brain processes contradictory facts as a literal physical threat.
Wow, so logic just goes out the window.
Completely. But deep canvassing research proves that narrative-based empathetic exchanges are actually the only reliable mechanism to bypass that defensive perimeter and shift attitudes.
So you have to disarm the threat first.
Right. When you ask a genuine question and invite a personal story, you shift the cognitive processing. You move the interaction away from a factual dispute, which is a binary win or lose scenario, and into a values exploration, which allows for nuance without triggering all those defense mechanisms.
Okay, so the playbook works for the individual interaction. Bypassing the amygdala hijack through narrative, that makes total sense. But taking that individual psychological mechanism and scaling it across hundreds of thousands of people in a massive bureaucracy, that is an entirely different beast.
It's the hardest part.
I mean, a single workshop isn't going to fix a university's culture.
No, and this is the fundamental failure point of most diversity or organizational culture initiatives. They rely on isolated interventions. A leadership team will mandate, like a single afternoon workshop, or they'll issue a new policy statement, or offer some optional seminar.
Right, checking a box.
Exactly. And organizational research consistently demonstrates that these isolated interventions fail to produce any durable cultural transformation.
Yeah.
The intention might be entirely genuine, but the structural reinforcement is just absent.
It's the equivalent of buying a gym membership on January 1st to fulfill a New Year's resolution.
Oh, absolutely.
You go twice, you feel this brief sense of accomplishment, and then you never step foot in the building again. But you keep telling everyone you belong to a gym. The required behavior isn't actually integrated into your daily life.
So, to counteract that specific failure of integration, the Constructive Dialogue Institute developed a 5-pillar systems model. You have to weave the behavior into the very fabric of the institution. You can't just adopt one pillar, they have to interlock.
Okay, let's break down that ecosystem.
Sure. So pillar 1 is leadership commitment. Pillar 2 is curriculum and pedagogy.
So what's taught in the classroom?
Right. Pillar 3 is the co-curricular experience. So that's residence life, student activities, clubs. Pillar 4 is policies and structures. And Pillar 5 is measurement and assessment.
I think we really need to explore how these pillars rely on one another, because if you just teach the skills in a classroom, which is Pillar 2, but you don't align your campus policies, Pillar 4, the whole system just collapses.
It creates total cognitive dissonance for the students.
Right. Imagine teaching students how to engage in authentic, messy disagreement in a freshman seminar, but your university's social media policy severely punishes anyone who expresses an unpopular thought online. The mechanism only functions when the structural policy actively protects the pedagogy.
And that is the defining insight of this systems model. The City University of New York, CUNY, they provide the premier case study for doing this at scale. They applied this 5-pillar ecosystem across 26 campuses, serving over 220,000 students.
220,000, that is massive.
Massive. And this meant training not just the faculty, but academic advisors, residence hall directors, and student peer leaders. And elite institutions are adopting the exact same comprehensive approach.
Like Harvard, right. I saw they were in the report.
Yeah, Harvard embedded this curriculum utilizing a platform called Perspectives directly into their required freshman orientation. Brown, Duke, and Vanderbilt also wove it directly into their mandatory first-year curricula.
Returning to our gym analogy, this 5-pillar approach isn't just buying a membership. It is tearing your house down to the studs and redesigning it so that your work desk is a treadmill and your refrigerator only unlocks after you do 10 push-ups.
That is a very intense way to live, but yes.
It makes the desired behavior inevitable through environmental design.
And the word mandatory is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there. Pillar 2 really emphasizes curricular integration, because if dialogue programs are kept as purely optional co-curricular activities, you suffer from selection bias.
Oh, because only the people who already care will show up.
Exactly. You only reach the highly motivated students who are already inclined to learn these skills. You end up preaching to the choir. True organizational change requires reaching the avoidant majority, that 45% of students who are actively self-censoring.
So by making it mandatory, you force the issue.
Right. By integrating it into required coursework, the institution signals that constructive dialogue is not an optional enrichment activity. It is a core competency required to participate in the community.
And the return on that structural investment is incredibly tangible. According to the data, 77% of students utilizing the Perspectives platform reported gaining valuable professional and life skills.
Which is a huge majority.
It is. And honestly, my favorite observation in the entire paper comes from a vice president of student affairs who implemented this ecosystem. They stated, quote, "Heckling is down. Engagement is up. Dialogue has moved from aspiration to practice."
And we also see this expanding well beyond traditional undergraduate education into highly specialized, really high-stakes environments.
Like where?
Well, the Kern National Network Partnership actually adapted this specific dialogue training for 10 medical schools.
Medical schools.
Yeah, they tailored the curriculum to address team-based clinical care and the navigation of intense bioethical disagreements. It proves that the mechanics of constructive dialogue are not restricted to just political debates. They are fundamental to professional functioning, especially when literal lives are on the line.
Wow. But here is the wall that CUNY, Harvard, and these medical schools eventually have to hit. If you make this mandatory for hundreds of thousands of students, who is actually doing the teaching?
The human capital problem.
Exactly. There are simply not enough trained human facilitators on the planet to sit down and role-play high-stakes, nuanced conversations with every single incoming college freshman or medical student. So they had to look to a pretty controversial solution.
They did. The bottleneck of human capital forced innovation. In January 2026, the Constructive Dialogue Institute actually launched a closed beta of an AI-enhanced version of their Perspectives program.
So they brought AI into it.
They embedded an AI coach directly into the digital curriculum. This AI is designed to simulate highly volatile, challenging dialogue scenarios, and it provides students with personalized, immediate feedback based on their specific conversational patterns and rhetorical habits.
Okay, I hear the argument for scale, but I have to push back really hard on this.
I figured you might.
Aren't we just teaching students to pass an algorithmic Turing test? It feels deeply, deeply paradoxical to rely on a large language model to teach humans how to have human empathy.
It is a profound paradox.
Right. Like, how do we know this empathy actually translates to an organic human interaction rather than just teaching an 18-year-old to parrot AI-approved, sterilized talking points?
The concern about algorithmic sterilization is incredibly valid.
Right.
But to understand why the data suggests this actually works, we have to look at the psychological concept of deliberate practice.
Deliberate practice, okay.
Real-world human arguments are incredibly high stakes. They're unpredictable, and they're messy. When a student is facing a hostile peer, their heart rate spikes, and that amygdala hijack we talked about takes over.
The panic sets in.
Right. And that state of physiological panic is the absolute worst time to attempt to learn a nuanced communication skill.
It's like you don't learn how to swim by being thrown into a hurricane.
Precisely. The AI provides a vital low-stakes sandbox. Consider how we train commercial pilots. We don't put them in a real cockpit during a thunderstorm for their first lesson. We put them in a flight simulator.
Ah, I see.
The AI coach functions as a conversational flight simulator. It allows a student to practice the mechanics of asking genuine questions or identifying underlying values in an environment where making a rhetorical mistake doesn't result in public cancellation or the destruction of a friendship.
So it's about muscle memory.
It's exactly.
Ah.
Through repetition, the student builds cognitive muscle memory. So when they eventually face a real human being in a high-stakes disagreement, the mechanics are second nature. That frees up their cognitive bandwidth to actually listen and empathize rather than just panicking.
To be fair, the source material is very explicit about the guardrails placed on this technology. The AI is subjected to heavy auditing for bias across a multitude of ideological perspectives.
Yes, they aren't just letting it run wild.
Right. It undergoes rigorous comparative assessment against human-led training outcomes to ensure it isn't just generating polite robots. And most crucially, it is designed strictly to supplement human interaction, never to replace it. It is the batting cage, not the actual baseball game.
And that commitment to rigorous measurement, which actually ties right back to Pillar 5 of their systems model, that is what makes this approach compelling. They are not simply deploying technology to cut costs. They are systematically evaluating its impact on human behavioral change and then adjusting the algorithm based on empirical data.
It's a really comprehensive approach. Let's synthesize the journey we've been on today and connect it directly to you, the listener.
It's been quite a journey.
We started by examining society specifically mapped through the microcosm of college campuses that is rapidly retreating into silence, echo chambers, and epistemic closure. And then we detailed the specific practical mechanics of constructive dialogue, utilizing personal narratives and genuine questions to bypass the brain's defense mechanisms.
We then analyzed why individual efforts fail without a supporting ecosystem, exploring how sustainable change requires that 5-pillar model to integrate leadership, curriculum, and policy. And finally, we examined the frontier of deliberate practice, leveraging AI simulators to build cognitive muscle memory for empathy.
And the reason this matters to you is that these are not just survival skills for a college dorm. Major employers consistently cite communication, teamwork, and the ability to solve problems across deep differences as the most critical workforce competencies lacking in today's talent pool.
They are absolute career super skills.
They really are. Whether you are navigating a tense strategic meeting in a corporate boardroom, trying to organize a fractured community project, or just attempting to survive a highly polarized holiday dinner with your family, the mechanics of constructive dialogue apply.
And the societal stakes extend far beyond the boardroom or the dining table.
Mm.
If we cannot effectively communicate across our divides, we lose the capacity to solve any of the complex logistical, economic, or environmental challenges facing us. The ability to manage conflict without destroying the relationship is, fundamentally, the requirement of a functioning pluralistic democracy.
Which leads to a final thought I want you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We established early on that in our highly polarized world, Our natural instinct is to view a major disagreement as a severe threat.
Right.
Like a boxing match where someone has to get knocked out, or a powder keg that must be avoided at all costs to survive.
The fight-or-flight response really dictates that framing.
But what if we completely upended that paradigm? If your communication skills can atrophy like a muscle from lack of use, then perhaps the person you profoundly, fundamentally disagree with isn't your enemy. What if we started viewing a major disagreement not as a threat, but as an intellectual gem?
Under that framing, the opposing perspective isn't an attack. It is the necessary resistance required for cognitive growth.
Exactly. What if the colleague or family member who drives you completely crazy is actually the essential sparring partner you need to practice your own intellectual humility? You cannot just swap out a busted spark plug to repair human connection, but you can step into the gym. The structural systems are being tested, the playbook for constructive dialogue is written, and the science supports the methods. The only question remaining is whether we are willing to step up and put in the reps.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.